Hey guys, today I'm going to explain episode 15 of Miss Night and Day Season 1. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, you'll find the link in the description. In this episode, Gaeun is shown looking at her phone, where she discovers that Minjeon had called and messaged her several times. The message said that if she doesn't respond to her calls, she should go to the police. Gaeun calls Baehee and tells her what happened. Later, Jaewon comes to Minjeon's place and finds out that something has gone wrong. Minjeon had previously told Gaeun that if she doesn't answer her calls, she should contact the police. Jaewon tries calling Minjeon, but to no avail. Later, Jaewon checks her location and realizes it's the same place where the criminal had taken Minjeon. Jaewon then tells the police to send backup and rushes over himself. Gaeun is shown tied up in a warehouse, and she wakes up to see Yeseom eating nearby. Minjeon asks Yeseom where her father is and warns her not to hurt him. But Yeseom says she doesn't want to harm her father, only her. Meanwhile, Jiwon is shown on the farm looking for Minjeon. He sees a phone lying on the ground and asks if it belongs to Minjeon, but Yeseom denies it. Jiwon checks his phone and notes that Minjeon was last seen there with Yeseom. Jiwon decides to search the area and ask Gaeun to find out who the phone belongs to. Later, the police arrive, and Jaewon also arrives at the scene. They discover that Minjeon's father is unconscious, having been drugged. The police mention that Yeseom's house is nearby. In the next scene, Minjeon is shown with Yeseom, who is preparing an injection. Minjeon is trying to cut the ropes binding her hands. Minjeon accuses Yeseom of killing her aunt, but Yeseom dismisses it as unimportant, suggesting that Minjeon didn't care enough about her aunt to find out where she was. As Yeseom approaches to inject her, Minjeon manages to cut the ropes and escapes. Yeseom grabs the syringe and starts chasing her while the police close in. The scene begins with Ji entering the house, noticing something outside, and then rushing away. He then arrives at a nearby cage and sees two names written on it. One is Minjeon's, and the other is Maseon's. Minjeon's phone is also there. Shortly after, the police arrive, stating that Minjeon should be around. Ji notices that some ropes have been cut and realizes that Minjeon might have escaped. Ji quickly rushes out in search of Minjeon. The next scene shows Minjeon running through the forest with Yeseom chasing her. Minjeon hides behind a tree, observing Yeseom, who suddenly appears and attacks her. Minjeon had picked up a syringe earlier and tries to use it, but Yeseom overpowers her. Yeseom then takes out her weapon, preparing to kill Minjeon, but suddenly notices that it is actually Yeseom herself in front of her, confused by the situation. The scene cuts to a flashback where Yeseom is shown tying someone up and beating them. Now, Minjeon approaches Yeseom, who is backing away, thinking it might be a ghost or a hallucination. Yeseom mutters that she had already killed her, but Minjeon gets close enough to inject her with the syringe. Minjeon realizes that her aunt has died, and Ji arrives shouting for her. Ji notices a princeling being held captive nearby and calls the police, informing them that the criminal is there. Ji then sees Minjeon's shirt and a cat nearby, recalling Minjeon mentioning that the cat speaks. The cat starts to walk away and Ji follows it. In the next scene, Minjeon is seen walking, and the cat leads Ji to her. Ji spots Minjeon and rushes toward her, but it's already dawn. When Ji reaches Minjeon, he realizes that it's actually Maseon. Later, they dig around where Minjeon was held, uncovering remains of bodies. Someone informs Ji that the remains are 20 years old, but they can be tested to identify them. Ji already knows that one of the bodies is his mother's, recognizing a ring he had given her years ago. Ji kneels beside his mother's remains, crying. Meanwhile, the camera shifts to a hospital where Maseon is with a gang. Maseon expresses regret for going alone, explaining that her father had been kidnapped and she was threatened. She asks where her father is and if he's okay. Gaeun reassures her that he's fine and resting, and offers to inform the doctor. Maseon then leaves, and the scene cuts to another where we see Aksun and Mom Chang together with Dop. Dop looks at her, but Dop had already told her not to go. However, she was very stubborn and took the address from him anyway, and left. This is a very determined person. Outside, Yeseom arrives, and she is watching her parents. Maseon is calling Minjeon, but there is no reply. Minjeon then recalls a memory with her aunt. where her aunt had promised that she would always be with her and would come to rescue her if she was ever in trouble. Later, Minjeon questions herself, asking why she hasn't changed now that the criminal has been caught. In the next scene, An is being discharged, and Minjeon arrives to meet her father, asking if he is okay. An reassures her that he's fine and asks about the scratch on her face. Minjeon explains that it's just a scratch. Maseon then tells Minjeon that she called her several times, but Minjeon explains that she lost her phone. Later, An receives a call from the police station about Maseon. The news reports about Maseon, revealing that she was responsible for the disappearance and murder of someone years ago, but has now been caught. Jase then speaks to Ji, asking why he hadn't told him earlier that his mother was also missing. Ji replies that he wasn't sure what had happened to his mother, whether she was missing or dead, but now he knows the truth. Jase then suggests that Ji should transfer the case to Yoni. Outside, Baek and Chinhee appear. Chinhee tells Ji that the case hasn't been transferred yet and advises him to speak to Yeseom. Ji then goes to Yeseom, who is sitting, and asks him why he hasn't asked her why she killed his mother. Ji calmly tells her to explain. Yeseom begins narrating, and the scene shifts to a flashback. In the flashback, it is shown that Yeseom had seen someone abducting a woman. Later, Yeseom went to Ji's mother to ask what she saw, but Ji's mother decided not to reveal anything. Eventually, Ji's mother decided to call Ji and ask him to come to her. But before she could, someone attacked her. In her last moments, Ji's mother pleaded for her life, saying she hadn't told anyone anything and begging to be spared because her son was waiting for her at home. But Yeseom killed her anyway. Back in the present, Yeseom tells Ji that his mother was begging for forgiveness and mentioned that her son was waiting for her at home. Ji finally confronts Yeseom, but doesn't kill her. Instead, he tells her that she will spend the rest of her life in prison, which will be her punishment. After this, Ji leaves, and later, Baek comes to console him, assuring him that everything will be alright. I also regret that when your mother called Joe and asked to meet, I went the wrong way. I should have looked around and run away, but I didn't. I regret this every day. In the next scene, Minjeon comes to Joe and tells him, "The criminal is Yeseom. She tried to kill me, she was the one who killed your wife, and she also killed my aunt." Joe starts crying and says, "You kept your promise, thank you." In the next scene, Chani is shown, who has just received the case transfer. She talks to An-sun and Ko, taking their statements about how they found out about Yeseom. Their statements match perfectly. Later, we see Maseon with Gang. Ji is trying to call Maseon, but she doesn't pick up. Gang asks her, "Why are you doing this? You should tell him the truth about yourself. The criminal has been caught. You'll be fine now." Kim Soon replies, "It's all my fault. I thought everything would stay the same, and I could take advantage of my aunt. But the reality is different." An-sun reassures her, "It's not your fault. You found Ji's mother and Maseon because of you. I'm so happy to have a friend like you. I'm going out to get food." She leaves and Maseon checks her phone, where she sees messages from Ji asking if she's okay, if she's eaten, and telling her that he's waiting for her call. Afterward, she looks at Ji's photo while Ji is at the office, staring at Heem-sun's empty seat. Meanwhile, Maseon is shown gazing out at the fence, feeling lost. She decides to go out for a walk, but just as she's leaving, Gang stops her. Maseon insists that she needs to go out and assures Gang that she'll be fine before leaving. As Maseon steps outside, Gang notices someone parking a car nearby. It's Baekdo. Instead of going to the police, Gang mutters to herself, "He helped me." She then approaches Baekdo and says, "You can't park your car here. Move it over there." Baekdo complies, and then Gang tells him, "Stop using your skills to mess with me and stop hurting me. Go home and be good to your wife." Baekdo responds, confused, "I don't understand what you're saying." Gang then asks, "Who told you that you're married and belong to someone else?" Baekdo replies, "That's not true. It was a long time ago, and there's a sad story behind it. A very long one." Gang acknowledges, saying, "It's true, Priya is dead." Gang softens and suggests, "We should go inside so you can tell me the story and we can have a meal together." Baekdo agrees. In the next scene, Mi-jin arrives home, where Ji is waiting for her. Mi-jin approaches Ji and asks, "How long have you been waiting?" Ji replies, "Since last night." He then asks, "Where were you?" Mi-jin explains, "I went out for a walk." Ji questions her further, "Why are you avoiding me?" Mi-jin hesitates and says, "There's something I want to tell you about where I work and what's been happening to me." Mi-jin was about to explain everything that was happening, but Ji suddenly interrupted, asking, "Are you going to tell me that you're Ma Se-on?" Mi-jin was taken aback and asked, "You knew? Since when? How did you find out?" Ji explained, "When you tied up Yessie and were leaving, I was coming in from the opposite direction and saw you change back into Ma Se-on. You should have told me." Mi-jin, struggling with her emotions, replied, "How could I tell you? This is a side of me that I never wanted to show the man I once cared for. How could I reveal this to you? I could never have gotten this job otherwise. But when I got older, I finally got the job. I had been working hard for years to get it, and then I got the chance to work with you. I saw you there every day." Ji, visibly upset, responded, "But still, you should have told me. I promised to protect you, but I couldn't keep that promise. When you were kidnapped, I went crazy. I was so scared and miserable." Mi-jin, after a pause, said, "Fine, I'll take responsibility for what I've done. Let's break up. I don't want to cause you and Han-yi any more pain." Ji, with deep sorrow, asked, "What about me? I've never cared for anyone as much as I care for you. What about the future I imagined with you?" Mi-jin didn't respond, leaving Ji behind. She walked away and went home, where she cried. By the next morning, Mi-jin had already transformed back into Ma Se-on. The following scene shows Jae-shik, who is approached by a reporter. The reporter asks, "Did you hear who caught the criminal?" But Jae-shik, still unaware of the details, replies, "I don't know, Ma Se-on doesn't work here anymore." Later, Chan comes to meet Jae-shik and shows him a statement. Jae-shik, reading it, says in disbelief, "Are you telling me that the real Ma Se-on was hiding her identity and that she stole Tam's name?" Chan confirms this and adds that Ji had instructed them to keep this quiet. Just then, Jae-shik receives a message stating that Ji is about to be transferred to Seoul. He shares this news with Chan, who looks at him, acknowledging that they need to follow Ji's instructions. Jae-shik sends a message saying, "Do whatever Ji says." He feels very happy and says, "Finally, Ji is leaving." In the next scene, Ji arrives with some food for Jae-shik and informs him that the criminal has been caught. Ji then asks where the boy is, as he wants to tell him that his mother has been found. The boy used to beg Ji every day to find his mother. Ji runs off to tell the boy the good news. However, Ji doesn't reveal that the boy he mentioned is actually himself. Meanwhile, An suggests that Han eat something. But Han refuses, stating that she knows her mother is alive and cannot die. She feels determined to find her mother, or at least reach her. In her room, Han overhears these conversations and decides to go outside. Suddenly, she encounters someone who tells her that she is Ma Se-on. Han is shocked and questions, "Why didn't I recognize you before? I shouldn't have kicked you out of the house." Han hugs Ma Se-on, who corrects her, saying, "I'm not Ma Se-on, I'm Mi-jin." Han struggles to believe this. As evening falls, An sees Mi-jin and realizes she is not Ma Se-on but Mi-jin. Han is taken aback, and the episode ends. The next episode, episode 16, will air tomorrow.